Welcome to the Planet Pulse Pacific podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg, joined by my co-host Abby Patterson, and we're coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ke te mana whenua o Aotearoa, and we also acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners, custodians, and local tribal authorities from wherever you may be listening to us.
Kia ora everyone, Richard Neville, an award-winning landscape architect whose career has had a focus on people living in harmony with our environment, and he runs his own studio, Neville Design Studios, based in Auckland, New Zealand. Kia ora, Richard.
Kia ora, Abby and Ben. Thanks for having me. It's an honour to be here.
Thank you. To get ourselves underway, give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself. Can you just give us a little insight into your passion for nature and your specific interest in landscape architecture?
Oh, kia ora, everyone. So I grew up in Browns Bay on the north shore of Tamaki Makaurau here in Auckland. And I didn't really know it at the time, but my passion for nature really started as a child, going on bushwalks and camping at Hahei in the Coromandel. And sometimes we would camp through storms, and that was just great fun, really. And bushwalks, even though I think we complained a little bit at the time as kids, ultimately we really enjoyed them, and that was sort of what sparked my connection with nature.
And then leading on to studying landscape architecture, why that in particular?
I actually was enrolled in architecture at Auckland University. And through school and chatting with careers people and things, it sort of seemed to make sense. And I had a year off after high school and went overseas, lived in France for 5 months, and Canada for 5 months. Came back, and I never really had my heart in architecture, but wasn't really sure what else was there. Anyway, I did one day of architecture at Auckland University, and I remember catching the bus home thinking, I don't really like buildings, and what am I doing? And then I had a chat with Mum and said, architecture's not really for me. And she said, well, maybe you should give it more than one day. And I had heard about this thing called landscape architecture, and fortunately enrolled in that at the last minute and sort of pivoted last minute into landscape architecture.
For those of our listeners at home who don't really know, how different is landscape architecture to sort of the architecture you were doing, and what drew you to it more than the regular architecture that you were originally doing?
I think it's a good question. Most people are familiar with architecture and they know what that means. And there's many definitions for landscape architecture. But the one that I like most is one which was shared to me by Catherine Gustafsson, who is a famous landscape architect and has a practice in France. Has done many great projects around the world, including currently designing 2 or so kilometres underneath the Eiffel Tower. So she knows a thing or two about landscape architecture. And the way she defines it is, if it's under the sky, it's landscape architecture. And the reason I like that definition most is it summarizes it. It summarizes something which is incredibly complex in an exceptionally simple and beautiful way, which is landscape architecture is really about the interconnectedness of everything, whether that's bike lanes, cities, our environment, the bush, your backyard, gardens, plants, people, economics, everything all coming together. That's really what landscape architecture is about. It's about systems and ecology and the way everything overlaps, and summarized beautifully by Catherine Gustafsson, who I had the privilege of meeting a year or two ago when she was in New Zealand. Yeah.
What was a turning point in your career where you realised you wanted to sort of focus on doing good for the environment? And do you think that that kind of original turning point and how your views have sort of changed since then throughout your career?
I think doing good for the environment was always in me. And probably the initial shift from architecture to landscape architecture was part of it. Obviously, architects do enormous good for the environment also, but they're really focused generally on the object, whereas landscape architecture is focused on the space. And there's so much that happens in spaces. And for example, when I was in France, when I was about 18, 19 at the time and my year off, I was more intrigued by the way people were sitting on steps or edges of things or walking through a space or interacting with each other. And the mechanics of how all of that worked much more than the buildings themselves. And of course, that stuff happens with buildings as well. So I think that shift, I think that passion was always there. And then in terms of my career, I was fortunate to work for Xanthi White, who is a well-known designer here in Auckland, in New Zealand. And for me, the intimacy that she has for land, for people, the freedom and the way in which she designs, and the beauty in the way that she sees the world and the way that she works with people and projects and all of that sort of thing just sort of kicked the door down for me, really. And really, really, I guess, heightened my focus on the environmental side of landscape architecture and design. Yeah.
Has landscape architecture evolved over time, and what have been the main influencing factors for that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it has. And I think in some ways, it still has a long way to go, but there's amazing work being done by landscape architects all over the world. And there's many ways in which that it has evolved, but I would say the general trend is that landscape architecture, landscape design, garden design, to me, they all overlap. Traditionally, they were all about controlling nature. So you think about somewhere like Versailles. I'm not sure if either of you have been to Versailles, sort of near Paris. Ben's nodding. So it's a well-known, enormous. It's a palace, an enormous garden, and that was absolute control over nature. It was man over nature, and this separateness between people and nature. And I've been there. It's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but it really does show the disconnect and the perspective where we sit over here on one side and then nature's over there. It's wild and it's something to be tamed. And then the dialogue has shifted, I would say, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years or so, where wildness, ecology, messiness, even in landscapes and gardens, are celebrated. And there's some conversation around whether that is a trend, but I would say it's more of a response. It's a movement. And the world is looking for positive change. And if you have plants and people and gardens in your hand, why not make them wild and beautiful? And that's the realm that I have the privilege to be involved with.
And it was actually making me think about that there's that recent study, they've called it the extinction of experience, that human and nature connections declined around 60% in the last 200 years, and that so much of that is just because of how like urbanized a lot of our life is. And I think it's really cool that I guess a lot of what you're doing and sort of what a lot of landscape architects are doing is kind of trying to bring that experience back, bringing that experience back to people. What you've kind of said is kind of led quite well into sort of the next question I had, but sort of what makes your style of sort of this rewilding and infinity gardens unique and something that we can get excited about in a way compared to, and how is it more sort of eco-friendly than your typical manicured lawn that we might see and like the one in Versailles and things?
Yeah, so in some ways I wouldn't say it's unique. And I mean that in a good way. There's a lot of people out there doing amazing work and doing this kind of work. I'm not alone. There's a huge tribe of designers worldwide who are really leaning into. It's got different names. The more wild-looking landscapes, naturalistic gardens, wildness, generally regeneration, revitalization. The R words, they're the exciting words. Like we talk a lot about sustainability, which is great, but to me, sustainability is a little bit about sort of treading water and staying in one place. And Papatūānuku, Mother Earth, is in a place now where we really need to give back. And for me, that's about the R words like regeneration, revitalization, resilience. And the way that we give back as landscape architects is fortunate then that we're able to plant spaces and rewild places. And I think one of the greatest tools we have, and something which I really try and lean into, is in some ways quite straightforward, and that's simply have larger areas of a particular space or design planted, and less paving or less lawns and that sort of thing. So landing the right clients and the right projects is part of the puzzle. But when you have a group of people walking together down the road together, then really exciting things fall out of that, and those are the projects which I enjoy most. And I don't think I'm particularly unique, but I mean that in a good way. Like there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work, and I'm one of many, I would say.
So yeah, there's one thing that I saw. This was a quote that I pulled from you in a recent interview that you gave, and that you said that sort of traditionally gardens have been about controlling nature, but increasingly garden design is about giving something back to earth. And what do you kind of think that you're giving back to earth in the work that you're doing?
Oh, I would say many things. A nice little moment that comes to mind for me, and sometimes it's the smallest moments which can sort of stay with you the longest. I was fortunate to work work on a project with the New Zealand Heart Foundation, and that was one which turned a parking lot or car park into a garden and cafe space. And there was a local guy who was walking past the side as the work was going on. He walked past daily, and then I was there catching up with the team on site, checking in with them. And he walked over and he said, "Hey, this is really cool. It's really nice to see a space that was a car park being turned into a garden rather than the other way around, like whether it's a landscape or a park or a garden or something being turned into another car park, and unlocking that space which is taken up with cars in that example. Cars are cool, don't get me wrong, but there's other ways of getting around, and trains are cool too, so are bikes. And this particular project turned 5 car parks into 5 bike racks, which sit discreetly off to the side. The rest of the site is 100% permeable, which means the water can percolate into the ground and helps reduce flooding. And it's just abundant with life for people and ecology and bugs and insects and all the rest. So
you've kind of already mentioned this, but if there were other ones you could think of, but is there an experience where you were sort of able to see firsthand the work you've done having a positive experience on both people and the environment? Like, have you sort of been able to see, like, years after a design was made, or kind of how people's reactions to it being done? Was there something where you were able to see how what you were doing had a positive experience and how that impacted you or motivated you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'm fortunate to get that experience quite a lot, actually, which is just awesome, really, and quite unique to the work that I do, and it makes it hugely fulfilling. One in particular which sticks in my mind is a project which I did for West Harbour School, which is in the west of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland here. And when that project was finished, just stopping, just sitting and watching the students run around and enjoy a space which was largely concrete and lawn and became almost all garden, and has seasonal change and all the rest. And one of the teachers said to me, "Oh, we used to have to go to Cornwall Park or something in our holidays. Now we can just come here." And it was amazing, and the pride and the mana of the place. And yeah, it's a beautiful school, and like many schools, or at least some that I have seen, they can be quite concrete oriented, and to be able to be involved with a project which brings life to a space which is largely lifeless is a huge joy. And the deputy principal at the time said to me, just sort of on the fly, and again, it's the small things which stick with you, she said, "The garden engenders joy." And yeah, that was a huge privilege to be part of that project and hear those kinds of things and just see the change. Yeah.
You talk about the benefits that this brings to people and community. What about ecological benefits? What can that actually contribute back?
Many things. I mean, I think that nature and plants and ecology are sometimes thought of as things which are over there. It's like dock land. It's way off. It's separate from us. And when we bring those things closer to us, then we're actually providing habitat and life for birds, bugs, bees, insects. And when you have diversity in planting, then you have much greater habitat for a wider range of things. And that connectedness between a plant and a bird and people, and when we have spaces which we perceive as beautiful, then we care for them more. And I think that we're able to actually see that life, that ecology, the birds arrive. You plant something and all of a sudden, like a waka waka might be flying through, and that wasn't there before. And that's a really tangible way of us to connect with the good, or pieces of good that are happening in the world, and yeah, that creates change and positive momentum and energy, and lots of good things fall out of that.
That's such an awesome answer, and it was making me think about, like, when you talked about the school, how I remember I went to school in central Auckland, and obviously and there was a sensory garden at the school where there were certain elements, like there was a honeysuckle plant for taste and there was a lamb's ear that we would feel, and it was kind of all this, I remember it was that's still, even though, that was like over 10 years ago, that's still just such a strong memory for me of, just bringing that joy to like just a simple day at school. And yeah, I actually did have a question about how a lot of the work you've done with designing in schools, and especially, this future generation growing up, and how you've been able to bring you've brought an addition of nature to a school. But what are some of the most important aspects of designing in the school environment to you?
I would probably say not over designing. That's the first thing which comes to mind for me. Sometimes in architecture and in landscape architecture, we tend to try to do lots and design lots and over design things to be played with in a certain way. But the real beauty is in these spaces which have an openness and a flexibility to them for kids to be able to enjoy in their own way. For example, at the project at West Harbour, there were little pathways that started appearing in the garden, and the students were making huts and little ways of exploring the garden on their own. And the garden maintenance team, who are awesome, they're called the Mindful Gardener, and they just let these, we'd call them desire lines, in terms of from like a landscape architecture perspective, which is basically a path that you choose to go down, and it forms a linkage from one place to another, and these little nests and little pockets and things. And that's I think something which could be explored more, and letting, and not just kids, adults as well, enjoy a space in the way that they want to. For example, in the public realm, more often people are likely to sit on an edge rather than a seat. And that's simply because you feel like you're making a decision or a choice to sit in that place rather than being told where to sit. So these things can be designed in, but in a subtle way, and then you can experience a space the way that you choose to. Yeah.
The point I wanted to get onto now was kind of talking about the relationship between people and Papatūānuku, and it's something that I guess we're wanting to focus on a lot in these episodes, and it can be just applied to so many different disciplines and settings. But I kind of want to touch on what that means to you personally and how you are able to express this relationship through the work that you do.
Yeah, I think that's everything really, the relationship between us and Papatūānuku. And I guess one of the things which is maybe most important is just the connection with beauty. And when something is perceived as beautiful, then we're more likely to care for it. We're more likely to connect with it, engage with it, and be part of it, and less likely to exploit it and those kinds of things. So if you're in a fortunate position like I am, or many other designers and landscape architects, then being able to play with beauty and also shift the narrative in terms of what is considered beautiful, like you touched on earlier, formal lawns and gardens, and they're great, they're beautiful in their own way. But when we start talking about real beauty, imagine walking down the road and you look into a garden and it's a little bit overgrown and wild, and then 90% of the people walking past go, whoa, that's so beautiful. And that's because they know that that's providing the sense of ecology and diversity for people and for the planet. And talking of diversity, a great quote that I like is, diversity is not a characteristic of life, it's a condition necessary for life, like air or water. And that's from Wonderground, which is a journal from Georgina Reid, who's based just outside of Sydney, and that's from Jason Cotter from one of the articles in Wonderground. And for me, that quote just kind of stopped me, and it's like, whoa, this stuff isn't like a nice to have, this is necessary, not only for life of bugs and bees and birds and animals, this is for us. Even if we wanted to be completely selfish about it, we'd be planting the Earth's surface. And I think that when you sell it, so to speak, that way, you sell it as this thriving, abundant, regenerative world. It's an easy sell, like graphs and data and all that kind of thing. They're great, but they're boring. Like, let's get into the exciting stuff and really sell the dream. This is like this green, abundant, utopia which all of us want to live in and connect with one another and be a part of.
Yeah, that's such a true point. And I know because I studied for my undergrad, I did biology and environmental science. And I think going out of that, one of the big things that almost the takeaway point that almost everyone I know has from that degree is just realizing how everything is connected and how everything relies on each other. Like it's something where, like the example, like, oh, like if one animal goes extinct, that isn't just a problem for that species, it's a problem for all of the other like one that might mean another species gets overgrown and another one dies out because they don't have a food source. And it does show how diversity is just required for life and for everything. And I think that is that quote's really cool. I really like that.
Thank you. Yeah, you're exactly right, Abby. Yeah, another quote which I love, which talks to what you've just mentioned, and I think while some or hopefully most of us know that we need diversity and ecology in order to survive, sometimes it's a little bit hard to make the connections between, okay, so like dolphins and animals and trees and birds and bugs, and like, well, if we lose a couple of those, why does it matter? And what's the connection? Like, why? What's the real connection between us and the environment? Where's an example? And what's a tangible example? So another great quote I like, which is from Rebecca McMacken, who has a TED talk called Let Your Garden Grow Wild. And her quote is, "You might not like bugs, but they're still keeping you alive. 1 in 3 pieces of food that you eat is the direct result of insect pollination." And again, it's so simple, it's a simple quote, and it connects us with the reality of needing diversity and needing life in our environment, and therefore to feed ourselves. Even if we were looking at it through a selfish lens, we'd be out there planting trees. So I think there's a huge positive message which is starting to be told, and those little snippets of people who have been able to summarize these complex things exceptionally well, they're really powerful.
And it's something where I think, and I talked about before about this extinction of experience, that I think where so much of our days are spent on screens or spent indoors now, and it's something that we're able to bring that connection with nature back to our lives and with our daily world. And I think there's so much evidence to show that spending more time outdoors, spending more time in sunshine, spending more time in sunlight is better for our mental health and better for our physical health. And it's something that's been proven time and time again. But it's just so much harder in our lives that have just become so much more, urbanized and just so much more indoors. And I think it's really cool that there's things like, with the work that you've been doing, you've been able to sort of bring, and a lot of landscape architects as well, being able to bring that nature to us in these urban environments.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, on that note, I was talking with a client a few weeks ago, and they said, "Oh, so you ride your e-bike around and that kind of thing, trying to save the world." And they have a charity called Grow. It's called the Grow Collective, but Grow Forest Hill. And I'm fortunate to work with them at the moment. And anyway, they were talking about riding a bike, and I said, "Yeah, sure. It is good for the environment, but also it just makes me feel good. I get to work and I feel, not always, I have my bad days, but it's just awesome. You're never stuck in traffic. There's always a park at the front door, and you're getting this exercise. You're in the environment. Your day has a different shape to it. And by that, I mean, you might be able to drop in and grab a quick coffee from a cafe. Or you might bump into someone on the street or see that person walking their dog. And selling that positive message, like I said before, cars are cool, but bikes are cool too. And it's like building positive momentum together, and just unlocking a way of actually, even in our day-to-day, everyday life, just connecting with each other and the world more, and building positive change together. Yeah.
So for our listeners that want to bring more green space around them, I suppose a lot have gardens that they could go and play with and sort of change how that's designed and looks. A lot don't have gardens. A lot live in high density, living apartments and so on, townhouses, and it's very little green space. So what would be a key takeaway for our listeners in terms of incorporating some of these amazing benefits of green space? How can they incorporate that into their day-to-day living?
Yeah, you're right. To have a garden these days is actually a great privilege. And I mean, density is a good thing. Density is great. like pockets of mixed use development with medium density along a transport network. That's exactly where we need to be. And not everyone has gardens, so it's a great point. I would say something as simple as buying a pot and putting rosemary in it will give you great joy. And it's really about connectedness. Like, it's you and the plant, and maybe that one dies, but the next one might not, And rosemary, as an example, has been is linked to improving your memory and your brain function. So going out there and smelling the rosemary might actually, it will help you with your day, And I know that you talked about lockdown before we started, and during that time, the garden centres just went nuts, and people who were able to grow food or just simply grow thyme on their balcony, it gave them a sense of purpose. And that's so much about what gardens are about. It's not only about like growing the food or seeing something change or connecting with those around you. It's about a sense of purpose. And when you put a seed or a little seedling in the ground and you see it grow into a lettuce or thyme or rosemary, then you're just more connected and gives you a reason to wake up in the morning and care for this little thing which is alive. So even a pot makes a difference, and the bird or the bug or the butterfly that lands on that rosemary, or maybe it's just a annual flower or a perennial or something, it's made a difference to that bug too. So small change by many is big change.
Brilliant, Richard. It's been a really inspiring conversation, bringing something that seems complex, that you need to be a council worker or a big property owner to be able to do something with nature. But actually, as you've just said, it's something that we can each incorporate into our lives, even starting off with a simple pot plant on our windowsill even. So thank you so much for bringing such inspiring stories, but also simplicity in terms of how we can bring this to a greater cause. So thank you so much for your time and coming onto the show.
No worries. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Abby.